I get to ask what I want to ask, and that I told them that it will be okay when we get through with this. So I don't want to prolong this because we have a lot that we want to cover in a short period of time. The ground rules that you will hear about, I'll tell you about when they come out, and we'll dive right into it. They do not know what I'm going to ask them. They only know the different categories that we looked at. And then I get to decide which ones that I want to pull up, and I'll tell you that when they come out. And I'll tell you the ground rules that I'm going to give them. And then I was planning to get out right at 5 o'clock so I could try to get over to the game right before 6 o'clock. But traffic and transportation is probably one of the issues I'm going to touch on with them. So it's unclear how I'm going to make that happen. But I will test them to see which one is the most powerful, and that will be the one that can tell me how he or she can get me police escort over to the game. So with that, let me call out the three mayors. Mayor Libby Schaaf, give her a hand. Mayor Sam Liccardo, give him a hand. And Mayor Ed Lee, give him a hand. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. You see that? They waited till I sat down. We're off to a great start. So, just right quick on the ground rules, we're going to have a very engaging conversation. I love the framework that was offered to me and some thoughts that I have around it. The only ground rules are very simple. The first one is we're going to ask you to keep your answers pithy but very thoughtful. The second ground rule is no talking point answers. So if you all hear the talking point answers going up, kind of give me a sign that talking point. And then the third one, which is the test that I personally use all the time when my communication team asks me to give them a quote, I call it the blah, blah, blah test. And this is the honest truth. And so we're going to ask that you not in any way give us a blah, blah, blah answer.
Apparently on the wrong stage.
And I was going to offer that anyone wants to leave right now, you can do that. Okay, so I have several categories, but I'll tell you the three that I'm going to try to hone in on. Just so the audience know, I have housing, transportation, the economy, technology, drought, public safety, policing, and then mental health. All right, so that's a lot. So here are the three that we're going to dive in on. Housing, transportation, and public safety, policing. And you'll see how this comes together. So to get started, just in case these aren't the three you wanted me to talk about, bring up right quick. So for each of you, what is the top issue in each of your cities that's on your mind? And how do you view that in the context of your city and the region? So let's start first with Mayor Schaaf.
Well, Bernard, I would say in Oakland, safety is the top issue. And my approach to it is a real holistic and community-driven approach. Yes, in Oakland, we need more cops, that is for sure. But we also need them to do better policing. For me, that's community-based policing, and that is something that more and more studies and evidence is really demonstrating is needed to be effective. But we've also got to invest in proven intervention and prevention strategies, as well as addressing those root causes of crime. And it's interesting, as a health professional, the social determinants of health, I think, are really the same as those root causes around safety. We need better jobs and economic security, and we need much better educational outcomes for our kids.
That's great.
Was that blah, blah, blah?
No, you passed. You passed. Give her a hand. She definitely set the bar. Let's see what happens next.
Number one priority is stealing Libby's baseball team. I'm joking. Oh, no. Oh, come on. We're all friends here. Tough crowd. Libby's right. I think, at the intersection of crime prevention and broadening opportunity is really where I think we need to be focused. And so we've been spending a lot of time and resources on efforts around, for example, expanding teen job opportunities for kids in high gang impacted neighborhoods, expanding after-school programs. We know this is obviously great in expanding opportunity for these kids. We also know it's a proven strategy for reducing crime.
Excellent. Mayor Lee.
Thank you, Bernard. Housing, that's my number one focus. And within that very complex, multi-level word is all this strata that we really have to pay attention to, particularly workforce housing. It's something we haven't paid attention to. I know all of you here as employers, to the extent that you felt a lot of success here in San Francisco, if not the region, we can't build it fast enough, nor rehab it fast enough. And I've got a plan, 30,000 units of both public housing, workforce housing, low income, and housing as well. And we're going to guarantee that it's going to be 33% affordable to middle to low income, and 50% of it to middle income. But we can't build it fast enough. We've got some old things that all of three of us have suffered from. We have complained to each other about how slow state credits get pushed out, how it's not the highest priority for a lot of financial institutions. And we've had to muster up many sources of funding for these affordable housing. Now we're on a pace, we're figuring out, I've got 30,000 goal. We're well on our way, and I know that housing isn't just the built and rebuilt. We also have to stabilize neighborhoods. We have to prevent speculation from occurring to wholesale buildings of people who've just honored themselves and built their lives in the city. So we've got to have a multifaceted approach, and I'm so buoyed by San Jose's announcement that they're going to really work on the homelessness issue in the next 5 years. I'm really glad to hear that, because if we all don't do our regional, our work, other regions suffer, because the homeless population does move around the entire Bay Area.
Great. So let's go to the housing theme more directly. And before I do that, let me ask everybody to congratulate Mayor Liccardo. I understand there was an announcement made, in fact, today that you hit the 1 million mark.
Yeah, somehow or another we hit 1 million again, and I think we hit it 5 or 6 years ago, and I think we keep bouncing around, so we get to keep announcing it every year, it seems like. So it's a little odd. It's a little bit like, having a Kardashian reality show in your city, because they're living there, but the media only pays attention when they actually make it.
Very well, very well. So let's talk about housing. So on one hand, we're all extremely pleased from the business community, healthcare community, the overall economy, that things are looking up in California. A lot of jobs, a lot of demands. I happen to lead an organization that have over 200,000 employees. I have a lot of people who want to come to California to work. But guess what they say? I don't think I can afford to live in California. Or I have to live so far outside of the immediate work site in which I'm being recruited into, I'm not sure I want that kind of lifestyle that I spend 1, 2, 2.5, 3 hours a day commuting back and forth to work. So it impacts everything. How we recruit people to the Bay Area, how we keep people in the Bay Area, how we pay wages in the Bay Area, And so, like you said, Mayor Lee, it is a very complex problem. On the other side of the equation, you have a lot of other noise. You have neighbors who feel that we should have no more homes in certain areas, that you've maximized the space in the Bay Area. You have people like me who have a resident condo in San Francisco, and I don't want my view blocked. That's an ongoing issue that we but something has to give. So how do the three of you think about the housing crisis? Not just from your city's perspective, but across the board as a regional perspective, as a regional challenge. I will tell you, as an organization who spends a lot of money building stuff, I have to pay certain wages regardless of the geography, even though the structural is very different from owning a house in San Francisco versus owning a house in Oakland or owning a house in Pleasanton. But the rates that are required to get construction workers, for example, to do things in all of those areas is a common denominator. So you get my point. So let's dive into that. How do you think about it? What should we be doing? What are you doing? Where should we go from here?
I'm happy to start on that one. You know, talk about a regional issue. I like to think that our affordable housing was something that made your workforce possible. And, you know, last year the big talk about Oakland was the Brooklynification, how, you know, Oakland was kind of coming out from the shadow of San Francisco into its own. But this year there's kind of a new theory, which is the Twin Cities theory, that there's this symbiotic relationship between our cities where we really are reliant on one another. And I like that awareness because it's important, because our residents don't all work within our municipal boundaries. And because people are now discovering Oakland, we are the second fastest rising rents of any city in the country, not the Bay Area, the country. And it's just like what you said, the construction costs are the same, but when the rents are lower, new construction doesn't pencil as easily in a place like Oakland as it does in San Francisco. And so that's been our challenge, because we're very clear that to address the affordability crisis, and it is a crisis, we have got to build more housing. We've got to do other things too. You know, just like I like to say, we can't arrest ourselves out of a crime problem. We cannot build our way out of an affordability problem. We also, you know, we don't have enough time or money to build all the housing that we need to make the impact that we need to make as quickly as we need to make it. So we also need to adjust our policies to give more security to the people that are already living in our cities. So we've got to do all of that, and we cannot be afraid of new construction.
I agree with Libby. You know, you're looking at three mayors who would probably be pretty strongly aligned on this fundamental issue about the need to build more housing. There's no question that the big cities carry the heavy load in the Bay Area. I think what we need to do regionally is encourage many of those suburbs, which tend to be very job-rich, to start to look toward housing their own. And there are an awful lot of communities along the peninsula. A lot of communities, for example, along the peninsula where there are companies I won't name that are employing lots of people that are coming from large cities and come at great distances. And we know that doesn't do anything to help our region's efforts to reduce GHG emissions or traffic or anything else. And so I think we need to start thinking more about how we can encourage and prod our suburban communities to also get involved in the construction business. You know, San Jose permitted almost 5,000 units last year. I know San Francisco was at 4,000. You know, these three cities are consistently pushing the envelope to try to get more housing. We're doing it at very dense, high densities. I know in downtown San Jose, we have 1,600 units under construction. We have a very small downtown, and we're going to have another 1,000 right after that. We'll keep doing it, but we've got to all do it together.
Very good.
And San Francisco as well, we're learning, and I totally agree with Libby and Sam, and we're trying to be as creative, and I think that creativity also can be reflected in the public-private partnerships when we approach housing challenges. I think that I would love the speed of market rate developers matched with the passion that we have to help teachers and nurses and others get the housing that they need, fire and police. we are figuring out more and more that there are sectors of our society that haven't thought about this as a priority. Like, for example, all of our churches. We now have a great conversation with the Interfaith Council. You know, they have churches, and then they have big, huge parking lots. And more, because of the income inequality, their parking lots are empty. And they're starting to talk with us about how can we work with the city to use our parking lots to build that housing for what they term as essential workforce.
Yeah.
Many churches have that ability, and all we need is the public-private sector to come and join them, and I think it's a great relationship, and the more and more examples you'll see of how those housing developments will come. The other part is we're only 49 square miles, and so we need partners that will build appropriate housing, and I agree that those suburban neighbors that are a huge part of in creating workforce have got to also add units to that housing.
Okay, very good. So the housing problems and people traveling all over the Bay Area leads to major transportation issues. And on one hand, I think we all would agree that, you know, BART is crowded every day, and so it's at capacity. People are traveling by boat, and trains, and cars, and you name it. I even seen a couple of helicopters flying around. So how do we think about the transportation issue? How do we think about decongestion? Or should we just let everybody sit out in traffic all day until people say, yeah, I had enough and I'm not going to keep commuting back and forth? How do we deal with this as a regional issue?
Well, you know, I think there's an opportunity for partnership here in among the Bay Area cities to really lean in right now. In Sacramento, as cap and trade money is starting to be created, to really get our share for the very important capital expansion projects we have, whether it's BART to San Jose or the Caltrain improvements, or the many improvements needed on the East Bay as well. We've got a lot to try to build if we're going to be able to move our people around. It can't happen through the automobile. We can't build freeway lanes fast enough. Even if we had the money, we wouldn't be able to catch up with it all. And so it really requires a significant investment in transit. We are certainly spending a lot of our time and effort flying back and forth to DC and running to Sacramento to see how we can nudge them along, and we're taxing ourselves. All three of these jurisdictions represented here have consistently passed ballot measures. We'll be going out next year for another sales tax measure to pay for BART more transportation. But I think we are not collectively as a Bay Area really batting our weight, and I think we could do more to get our share.
Early?
You know, we had a great conversation with our public last year. We voted in a $500 million transportation bond in San Francisco. We're halfway there, completing the Central Subway. That $500 million is now going towards new buses that will be the buses and trolleys in the very near future, made in Sacramento, by the way, Siemens Corporation. I think now it's upon us as mayors to treat the transportation issues as a region. We already are forced to do that because many of the funding streams ask us what our regional priorities are. And I must say, I have to give in sometimes to self-interest, and other times to say, no, I've got to support BART to San Jose. I've got to support BART in the Bay Area beyond our own self-interest. Now, I think we're having a great conversation, or beginning to have one that says, what does the future look like? All three of our cities are growing tremendous rates. So what is our vision? And this is one of those moments where mayors get to talk about vision, and transportation is very appropriate. We need to reorganize the way we cross that Bay Bridge. We need a second Trans-Bay tube in addition to BART to San Jose. We need Caltrain to move quickly on electrifying themselves, and I need to provide a vision of how that tunnels in to our Trans-Bay Transit Center. These are visions that will help federal and state monies understand where we're going in years in which, if we don't start planning it now and making smart investments, we'll be announcing another 1 million people, and we'll turn around and say, how did that happen? and how are they going? And we're already in that congestion, Bernard, that you experience and talk about. We need some immediate relief, but we also need a vision for people to believe that we're making the right investments.
Very good.
Yeah, and part of it is, I think, getting driven by talent. A lot of kind of millennial workers are rediscovering the joys of living in cities. And they are starting to kind of say, I don't want to sit in that traffic to the Warriors game. I want my company to come and be closer to me so that I can walk to work or ride my bike to work. Sam and I rode our bikes to work. Oh, actually, all three of us rode our bikes to work last week. It was really fun. So I think talent is driving some of that. I liked what Mayor Lee said about we sometimes have to put our own self-interests aside and think regionally about transportation. The second tube is something I also really support. I also think that we've got to get the core system of BART at a higher capacity before we start building extensions. But I think we're going to be doing that with that bond issue. And then we have all got to just shake our federal representatives awake and just say, infrastructure is not a partisan issue.
Yeah.
You know, concrete is not blue or red. It's not a donkey or an elephant, you know?
Well, you know, we also have a Bay Area shared gift that we all gave each other. We're all big supporters of the Bike Share program.
Yep.
That's going to grow from 700 bikes to 7,000 in the next few
All
years.
three of our cities.
Every one of our cities is going to be able to do that. And I know a lot of people say, I can't ride a bike. We're talking multimodal approaches. It can't just be any one system. It's got to be multimodal. And bikes is a greater part of that conversation more and more again.
Yeah.
That and the self-driving car. I'm all excited about that.
Yeah. Well, and following that theme, do you think that we're doing enough radical thinking about what can be different? I was thinking about last week, I was at a special program, and Travis, the CEO of Uber, made a radical statement about the vision of Uber that I'd never heard until last week. He said that his real vision is that no one would need to own a car where Uber is. And you stop and think about that. He's moved from single passenger to now having multiple passengers in the cars, et cetera. Pretty radical thinking about driving.
It's not that far off. You know, it seems to me we've gotten used to the idea of software as a service. Mobility as a service may well come in vogue as people start to look at the extraordinary cost of ownership, insurance, and everything else that goes into an automobile. And as car sharing becomes more ubiquitous, particularly as autonomous cars are increasingly getting out there. And we've got a little innovation zone we've created in San Jose to allow folks to test all these things. And we've got Cisco out there with testing their smart signals, and BMW's testing their smart cars, and smart cars are talking to smart signals. And it's a lot smarter than I can understand. But what we are learning is that if all this actually somehow works, we could see significant reductions in congestion, because we know out there on the roadway at any given moment on a freeway, 95% of that road is not being utilized, right? With autonomous cars, certainly things change. With people are no longer owning cars, but rather simply taking the car the minute they need it, all of a sudden parking demand shrinks considerably. I think we could see a very different transportation system within the decade.
And I think our job also is to figure out how our policies can keep up with innovation. I think sometimes government can really be a drag on disruptive technologies and kind of try and protect the old ways. And that's one of our challenges, to loosen up a little and accept a little more risk.
Yeah, there's no question about the impact of technology as one of those radical things. And I was just thinking, last year we did 26 million e-visits between our members and the physicians, right? That means they didn't have to drive across town to see the doctor, and they took care of those needs via technology. And by the way, the satisfaction rating on a scale of 1 to 10 was something like 9.3. So it's a winner, to your point. One final piece on the transportation, then we get to the last one. So you have a captive audience here. We employ a lot of people in the Bay Area, and in the greater Bay Area and in the region. what advice do you want to give this audience about what we can do to help to address the transportation issue in the region?
I would love for companies to take it upon themselves to assess and then use your own technology to try and figure out how to reduce the carbon footprint of your employees. There's got to be a carpooling app or something that could allow you very simply within your own walls to make, to reduce that congestion, reduce the emissions.
I would implore employers when they're making location decisions to think carefully about the future in transportation.
Oh God, I should have said that. And move your business to Oakland.
Yeah. They got room, we got room. Be happy to help you out. We know that companies are investing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in spaceships in suburban locations where there is no transit and it's never going to get built. There's going to be no fixed rail transit in those locations. And then demanding of governments go find the money to help transport our tens of thousands of employees. Look, there are urban options. And I think, as Yogi Berra said, the future ain't what it used to be. Workers are increasingly looking for the urban option. And I think employers need to recognize that as they're hiring the 20 and 30-somethings. Those are people who do not think like the CFO, who might be in their 50s, thinks about where they want to be and how they want to get there.
I think the immediate ask that I would have you consider is every employer ought to have public transit passes for their employees, just so that there is an immediate embracement of our public transportation system. So you encourage that to happen. That should be part of pay packages, not extra incentives. It's just the way we ought to conduct ourselves. The other part is we're going to put before all of you and your employees and the voters in this whole region a pretty large BART investment package. And we need you to pay attention to that. You already saw how old the system is. Every week you're going to hear about another possible failure, this and that. We need to make sure, as Libby said, what we have today is properly invested in so it works. And then as it works and we build confidence, as many people depend on BART now, we can talk and we could be planning, and then we need you to help us go to DC to get the serious money for the additional tubes and ferries and all the other multi-transit modes of transportation that we want to have in the Bay Area. This entire Bay Area is on fire. This is the right time to really think about this topic in a very visually positive way, because the workforce and the talent will be here if we do that. They will go away if we don't do it.
Yeah, and I think, we should take a breath and note that this is a good problem to have. Yeah. There are metropolitan regions throughout the country that would love to be in our position. So certainly we have every right to gripe about traffic, as I did as I was trying to get by the stadium on the way over here as the Giants game was being let out. But we've got a good problem because of the extraordinary job growth in our region.
So the last section that I want to now get into, and a couple of critical questions I want to ask in this arena. Let me start by saying, we all arrived here today and we're feeling good about the economy and things are happening and membership growth and all the businesses in this room are growing, and we have a host of problems, but in some cases they're good problems to have. So I don't want to focus on that in my last part. Because we're all in this room because, for the sake of where I want to lead this discussion, we're the haves. We're in this room, the Ritz-Carlton chandeliers, beautiful service, wonderful lunch, coffee.
I couldn't afford to stay here, though.
Me either. So let's talk about the other side of the equation, the suffering neighborhoods, the areas in which they are not enjoying the benefit of the great economy. First of all, in my first question, for each of you, describe what that looks like in your city. Give us a picture of how you view it. What does that impoverished neighborhood look like in your mind, or that neighborhood? So first describe that, and then I want to move to the public safety and some related issues as tangent to that.
Well, sorry, I just came from a funeral of a 16-year-old in Deep East Oakland today. And so that's a little bit about what it looks like. Statistically, I think about the 60% of my kindergartners who arrive to kindergarten not ready to learn. They haven't had the language development. They have been exposed to too much trauma. They may be grappling with mental and physical health challenges, and they may live in both economically and, housing instability. And then by the time they get to third grade, which, as you know, literacy is critical for success in school and frankly in life, the disparities, the racial disparities, 77% of my white kids read at grade level by the end of third grade. Only 27% of my African Americans and 23% of my Latino students. And so right there in third grade, we already have a tremendous problem. And then by the time they get to high school, they haven't seen that connection between their education and a potential career path. We're only graduating 2/3 of our students from high school. And I'm not even going to talk about how many of those end up going to college and how important that is, particularly in today's knowledge economy. And so, that changing that storyline is so critical. And I focus on educational outcomes, but knowing that educational success is so linked to health, to economic stability. So that is a little bit, both little picture and big picture, what it looks like in Oakland.
Really?
Obviously, we all three of us know those parts of our city well. We're probably called upon down there for too many wrong reasons. Isolation, hopelessness, a lot of kids standing around day and night in front of either their house or someone else's home with nothing to do. And then you ask them, what are you going to do? So I'm hanging out. Our Hope SF program is an attempt to transform those neighborhoods with those very kids and their families, not despite them. It's not a brick and mortar program. It is investing in those folks first with a heavy dose of critical services so that they know that there is some outcome that we would like to enjoy with them, and then engage them in how to rebuild their communities with their involvement. That is Hope SF. Used to be Hope 6 in the federal program. That went away. We created our own program. I'm a true believer in it. We've got public-private partnerships led by the SF Foundation and labor organizations with our city. And we're using the government's RAD program to be a great foundation for it. Now we're at the point where there is a good plan so solid that private investors are coming saying, we can actually make an investment there because you're not just going to rebuild public housing. No, we're not. We're going to rebuild communities in mixed income levels with people living side by side and getting the services that they need to be successful. Schools are included in that, job training programs, employers. And so that's the way we're rebuilding the entire southeast sector of our city. From Hunters Point, Alice Griffith, Sunnydale, and Potrero are next, and spots in between like West Side Courts and others. This is what we are doing in our larger agenda of prosperity sharing and dealing with income inequality. I've got to make sure we've put enough smart resources in the great equalizers of the day. Those equalizers are things like having free muni for young people because they got to get around before they can even get a job. Having the best public education system we can possibly produce by getting companies like yours investing in all of the aspects of creating good schools. The employment will be there because we have good employers, but I've got to make sure the entire approach is one that isn't just brick and mortar. It's actually got to be people first.
Right.
There's a neighborhood south of downtown San Jose, collection of neighborhoods called Washington Guadalupe, and about a half dozen years ago, we had some sociologists attempt to discern to what extent college was even on the radar of the kids there, predominantly Latino neighborhood. Less than 1% of the kids even attended college when they looked longitudinally over 20 years, let alone graduated. And it really goes back to the education piece that Libby was touching on. It was just apparent that, that's the height of despair, right? When the option even isn't on the radar of a child. And so, we've been working with a lot of partners. We need partners in San Jose because we're not swimming in cash like Ed is.
And we're really not swimming in cash like either of them are.
You got to win 3 World Series.
Yeah. Oh, we won't go there. So we've got a fantastic couple of charter schools that have moved in, are really helping to drive achievement in different ways. The local public district school said the best thing that ever happened to us was that the public charter school moved in next door, because now we're working harder. We've got Santa Clara University working on what we call a neighborhood prosperity initiative, working with the small businesses, the taquerias and the other small businesses to help them become more successful. And we're starting to see change, but we know it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of partners.
So first I want to applaud all 3 of you that you clearly understand holistically your cities.
Thank you.
And that's very important. So the last question on this part is, think about what we've talked about, the great parts of the cities, the challenging parts of the city. Interject into that thought process what we've been dealing with in each of our cities and around the country with policing and challenges and all of that. Based on all that has been happening, how have you been thinking differently about policing in your cities and for this region?
I'm happy to kick that off. I find it interesting that this issue of police legitimacy is actually tied to crime reduction. That when you have a society where people actually think the laws and the judicial system are fair, they tend to abide by the laws more. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want people to just voluntarily not break the law, not harm each other, not steal property? And so this issue of how your community perceives the fairness of your policing practices actually does have an impact on crime. We've seen in Oakland our clearance rate, our solve rate of serious violent crimes more than double over the last year. And the police credit that in large part to an improved relationship with the community. We're getting more intelligence and participation and cooperation from the community as we have made some huge reforms to our police department over these last 2 years. And then, it gets back to the social determinants of health, which I also think are the social determinants of safety. And those are the educational outcomes. You can't just think about it on the enforcement end. You've got to think about the holistic picture.
Very good.
I hate it. I'm always agreeing with Libby, but I'm going to agree with her again. I was a criminal prosecutor for about 8 years, and it is so critical to the task of everybody in the criminal justice system that you have witnesses who are willing to cooperate and come forward and testify, and none of that happens if they don't trust the cops. And that goes both into the issue that has been really exploding throughout the country over the last year, but also, for example, how we engage with our immigrant community, whether or not members of our community will believe the police are part of La Migra and they might be deported if they come forward. All those issues are really intertwined. And so, I know all 3 of our cities are moving forward, and I think you guys have deployed cameras on officers for over a year, I think, Libby, and that's clearly going to become the norm throughout the country. We're trying to bolster some of the range of investigative power of our independent police auditor, really not because we don't trust the police. We know the police are doing a great job and they're doing the best they can, but the reality is accountability is central in all of this, and everybody's got to be believing that we're all pushing in the same direction.
Great. Mayor Lee.
We continue to refine what community policing is, and when Mr. Benioff and Chief Sir and I took some kids out to watch a movie on Martin Luther King Day. We had a conversation with the very youth who had some strong feelings about the police relations after, of course, experiencing all the issues and the cases that have gone on around the country. In that conversation, they said, look, we need safety in my public housing just as Pacific Heights needs safety. The question is, can we trust our officers? And one part of that is the practices and the culture. The other part is, do they look like us? Do they talk like us? Do they know me and my friends and can distinguish me from bad dudes who are also on the same corner maybe sometimes? Do they know us well enough? And we said, they probably don't, and they need to spend more time, but we can certainly recruit. In fact, it's been 10 years since we had a complete cadet program that recruited youth from the very diverse communities that have issues with a trust. And so we began that again with public-private dollars to the tune of $1.5 million. Got a class of 40 coming up in August, directly recruited from the very high schools of kids who might want to be police officers or explore that.
And I just want to, since this is about regionalism, I want to thank Mayor Lee, who shared that concept with me, and I just put it into my budget. People are thrilled. Again, we call it the Pipeline Project, actually reserving seats in our cadet program for our local high schools, making a 3-year commitment to these youth until they're old enough to actually apply to be officers. And secondly, I want to thank you for helping us speed up our police recruitment by making 5 seats available in the San Francisco academies for Oakland training officers. That's going to help us speed up our recruitment. So that is partnership.
That's great. That's great.
Now, Ed, maybe you guys could lend us a few more cops, too.
All right, maybe some baseball players.
That'd be good.
So we're out of time, so I'm going to ask you to finish this sentence, and then we'll run out of here, those of us going to the game. Mary Lee, are you going to give me police escort across the...
Okay, but we'd have to charge you.
Yeah, exactly.
You could take Bart.
I'll take Bart. So here's the final question. It's a softball. Bernard?
Another sports analogy.
Yeah, it's easy. Bernard, I wish you had asked me blank.
Oh, I wish you had asked me, what more can Kaiser Permanente do to support Oakland's revitalization?
We're all in.
I wish you would have asked me, how many kids can we hire for your teen jobs program this summer? Because PG&E just came forward, they're hiring 10 kids. We'd love to get them employed at Kaiser.
Okay.
All right.
We'll answer that one.
Well, we'll get there.
I didn't mean for this to be personal.
You did? You certainly made.
Okay, but it's fair game. Bernard, I wish you had asked me. Oh, to be continued. Because I don't want to hear your answer. No, I want to hear your answer.
Wish you had asked me about the role of philanthropy in running a city. There are a lot of things to discuss about that, about how successful people can really help cities be successful for everybody else.
Very good. Not plugging Kaiser Permanente, but we have the privilege of caring for over 200,000 in San Francisco, almost 200,000 in Oakland, 197, and 220,000 in San Jose. And I want you to know it is an honor for me to know that you're the mayor of those 3 cities. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you.